Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have director and producer RJ Cutler with us today. We'll talk with RJ in just a second, but first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please follow or subscribe and rate and review, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So, R.J. Cutler is an award-winning director and producer who has been making documentary film and television series for over 30 years. R.J.'s work has been nominated for an Academy Award, and he is the recipient of numerous other awards, including 3 Emmys, 2 Peabody Awards, and a GLAAD Award. In 2009, the Museum of Television and Radio held a 4-day retrospective of R.J.'s work. In 2021, he was the recipient of the Critics' Choice Awards Pennebaker Award for Lifetime Achievement in Documentary Film. In 2020, RJ launched This Machine, a production company focused on developing and producing documentary projects for film and television, which is now a part of Sony Pictures Television. RJ's films include The War Room, BELUSHI, Billie Eilish, The World's A Little Blurry, Martha, and Elton John, Never Too Late. His television work includes Freshman Diaries, 30 Days, Elton John Live, Farewell from Dodger Stadium, Murf the Surf, Big Vape, Nashville, If I Stay, and the Oval Office tapes. RJ, welcome into the back room.
Thanks for having me.
So the first question I want to ask you before we get into your work, tell me about you as a kid, what kind of interests you had. I always like to get an understanding of what, 8, 9, 10-year-old people were like, because it often is a really strong indicator of what came after that and the work, the life work and the career that they've chosen for themselves. Also, the kind of family that you grew up in and how artistic was it, how much creativity was there. Give us a little insight into that.
Well, since you asked this question, often, as I do, by the way, in my work, I agree. It's starting at the beginning, it becomes very informative. When I was 8, 9 years old, I was doing 2 things. I loved sports. Certainly, and I was a very athletic kid. But my activities outside of the baseball, soccer, and basketball fields and courts were 2 things: journalism and theater. And I always had a school newspaper that I was editing from first grade on. In first grade, it was on ditto paper. As we got older into junior high, I edited the school paper, and then in high school, I started a magazine at the school that was, the kind of underground magazine that was inspired by both the National Lampoon and the Yipster Times, and the establishment newspaper were our enemies, and we would steal their typewriters and hide them in the principal's office and things like that. But we were good journalists, and so those were that was one passion from really elementary school on, and the other was I was a theater director. I mean, from first grade, I would gather my classmates once a year. In that period of time when winter was waning and spring hadn't really begun. So you didn't really, there was still some ice on the basketball court, so you needed other things to do. And I would write and cast adaptations of Charlie Brown books, of Peanut collections.
That's awesome.
Peanuts collections. This was, I can tell you, Adam Frankfurt played Snoopy, and Debbie Eisenberg played Peppermint Patty, and Irene Horowitz played Lucy, and I was Charlie Brown, and we do and we perform on the baseball field, site specific. And then in 4th grade, I adapted Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which had not yet been a movie. I'm that old that it was before the Gene Wilder film. And we did that. And these were my passions, and I loved it. And I continued these passions into high school, into college. And into my career, early career, out of college, I was focused very specifically professionally as a theater director, and had a wonderful early career I directed Jonathan Larson, the creator of Rent. I directed his first musical before Rent. I was James Lapine's assistant on Into the Woods, the original Broadway production. I did the original productions of The Secret Garden, which ran on Broadway for a number of years. So I was a Broadway baby, and I had a great career. And I also produced for National Public Radio. I had a John Hockenberry, the great NPR journalist, and I did a radio show called Heat during those early years of my career. That was a kind of late night talk show with other producers on that show included Ira Glass, who was in his This American Life years, and the show was very, you can see the roots of This American Life in Keat and Ira's influence on it. And so anyway, those were my passions, and it wasn't until I had the idea for the War Room that I was able to kind of marry these two passions in documentary filmmaking. But that is really what I think of when I always think of myself as a theater director who makes documentary films, and that's how I look at these films. I look at them as theatrical events and narratives, and of course, and I always kind of imagined, when I was in high school and I saw Harlan County, USA, the great Barbara Koppel documentary about the coal miner strike in Harlan County, Kentucky. I knew that the documentary was calling to me. I knew that it was something that mattered to me, and that I just always felt one day I'll be doing this.
I love hearing stories like yours, because it just is so fascinating to me to talk with people who got to do in their adult life the things that they were very passionate about as young children. You mentioned the War Room. What was it like working on that film? Because to me, those guys, and I got to know Paul Begala very well, and he's been on this podcast many times.
Yes, you did a fascinating podcast with him. Yeah.
And James Carville has been on. But like, to me, and I said this to Paul, like, you guys were the Beatles of politics.
Yeah.
Did you feel that then when you were working with them? Like, oh my God, I'm with like George, Paul, George, and Ringo of politics.
I'm not sure I felt it, but Penny did, and because Penny had something to compare them to, which were Penny had D.A. Pennebaker, who along with Chris Hedges directed the War Room, had been on the campaign trail with John F. Kennedy in 1960. And had filmed for Primary with Drew Associates, the kind of foundation of the American documentary movement, the American verite movement. Penny was one of the filmmakers. They worked as a collective, and Penny filmed with JFK during the 1960 primary in Wisconsin. And the movie's called Primary. People should look for it. You can get it now. And it was the Wisconsin primary, Hubert Humphrey versus John F. Kennedy, and he was there with JFK counting districts, biting his nails on election night, and so he knew what it was like, and he would say, I've never seen. Since then, I haven't experienced anything like this. This reminds me of that. Mm-hmm. And so, but also you couldn't, the youthful energy, the vigor, the fact that you'd walk into the War Room and it was, this center of brilliance. Yep. That was unmistakable, certainly. So it was thrilling. And it's always thrilling when you're making these films to float down into these extraordinary environments. I have very similar feelings when we floated into Vogue in 2007, and I felt I used to compare them to the great Yankees teams. Those guys, they were the greatest at what they did at the peak of their powers. I felt the same way when I met BILLIE, EILISH, and Phineas. I mean, how extraordinary to see this remarkable performer, poet, artist, teenager, and to recognize that in the room next door, having emerged from the same womb, was the greatest, one of the greatest pop producers to ever live.
Crazy.
Phineas.
It is.
I mean,
crazy.
yeah. So this is part of the great privilege of what attracts me. One of the things that attracts me to this work.
Well, it's really interesting what you just said, because I've always thought about how fate and circumstance brings people together who go on to create just historic levels of creativity and art and music and writing. I mean, you think about like how Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel grew up like on the same block in Forest Hills, Queens. How's
that possible, right?
Yeah, McCartney and Lennon, they were just like hanging out together at a church hall, like, and New George and Pete Best. I've actually had Pete Best on this podcast, which was a huge thrill for me as a big Beatles fan and as a drummer. And then in your movie, Elton, which I want to talk about soon, I'm gonna
serendipity.
I don't want to I don't want to get ahead of it, but like how him and Bernie Taupin got together. So it is kind of crazy how people do come together like that.
It is crazy, and Elton says it demonstrates to him that there's that there are forces, heavenly forces that at work on we mere mortals. I have said to Elton, as much as serendipity is the key, making Elton's life story is, I think, needs to be understood in the context of the fact that he made serendipity possible. The central narrative, of course, is Elton John at 17 years old, 18 years old, having been a performer already for a number of years, knows that he wants to be a songwriter and a performer, a lead performer, not just backing up other amazing musicians. And he answers an ad in a paper that says, songwriters wanted. And he goes to a music publisher, and the music publisher says, "Here, kid, take this," and hands him a sealed envelope that the publisher, the executive hasn't even opened. He doesn't know what's in there, but he just hands the sealed envelope to Elton. Elton gets back on the train home to Pinner and opens up the envelope, and in it are lyrics written by Bernie Taupin. How is that possible?
Yeah, well,
So
in the film,
that's serendipity. But my point to Elton is he got himself into that room.
Yes.
Serendipity matters, but you also have to make it possible. You have to have the courage to embrace possibility.
Yeah. Well, the word was used, serendipity, by him to describe that. But as a viewer watching it, I was more like, this is just totally fucking mind-blowing how those two got together. But I want to jump back for a second. Yeah. You produced The War Room. I think that was your first film that you produced. And then I think for about 3 years you produced. And then you said, hey, I want to direct. I want to do film as a director. A Perfect Candidate was your first film about Oliver North's 1994 failed Virginia Senate campaign. Did you always know that you wanted to ultimately direct? And what was the impetus? Why did it take, let's say, 3 years? Like, what happened that made you say, this is the time for me to do this?
Well, I'll tell you, we've now talked about my childhood. I was always a producer and always a director. It's I kind of think of myself in the showman model. I do it now. I run a production company that's a studio. Half the work we do is directed by other people, and half the work we do I direct. I love producing, and I've always loved it, and I'm very good at it. At 30 years old, 29, 30 years old, I could have the the idea of what the war room would become, and I knew this is why. Listen, I had a vision of myself as well as a vision of the film, and the vision of myself was producing this, and I knew how to get myself all the places one needs to get in order to. And there are many stories to tell about how the war room even happened. There's no excuse for that movie existing, you know, but it was produced within an inch of its life, not just by me, but by Wendy Ettinger and Fraser Pennebaker as well. But man, it had to be produced, and that was something that I loved doing and I was very good at. And I remember late in the process of the war room, I happened to meet a prominent NBA, a National Basketball Association figure who I thought there would be a movie to make about. It was Pat Riley. He was coaching the Knicks at the time, and I'm a huge New York Knicks fan. And
Me too.
I thought, and I talked to him about it, and he was resistant. But I was like, listen, we should come meet. I should, he had seen the film was done, and it was in its kind of peak, moment. And so he knew the film, and I was like, I'm going to bring D.A. Pennebaker to me and Chris Hedges to meet with you, and we're going to talk about making a film about Pat Riley, the greatest NBA coach who ever lived. And he was like, I don't know. But I went to Penny and I said, listen, let's go meet with Pat Riley. And he said, I thought you want to be a director. You want to be a producer? I thought you wanted to be a director. And I said, I do want to be a director, but here's a chance to make another film together. He's like, nope. You're going to direct the next film that you make.
Wow.
And until you wake up in the middle of the night screaming, you're not going to be a director. So you have to experience what that is like. But what mentorship, right?
Wow. What a great champion to have in your corner.
The best. And that's when around that time, David Van Taylor and David was an old college chum of mine and a great documentary filmmaker. And David and I decided that we would pursue the story of Oliver North running for Senate in Virginia against Charles Robb, and we made that movie, A Perfect Candidate. Now on the IMDb, of course, it looks like 3 years, but the War Room led directly into A Perfect Candidate. And the only thing in between the War Room and A Perfect Candidate was D.A. Pennebaker saying, you better learn what it's like to wake up screaming. And believe me, I did. I learned what it was like to wake up screaming on A Perfect Candidate. And that film, I wish it had a more robust, it's the one film I have that isn't really available, but it tells the story of the roots of Donald Trump's movement back in the early 1990s in the embodied by Oliver North. I mean, it's the same exact issues, the same playbook, the same base, the same everything. And it's a great story of American politics. It's kind of the dark side, the dark underbelly of the War Room is A Perfect Candidate. Really dark and twisted.
So you have 2 incredible films streaming right now. We started talking a little bit before about Elton John. The film is actually called Elton John, Never Too Late, and that is on Disney+. And it is an incredible film on so many levels. So congrats on that.
Thank you.
I don't know how much you know about me, but I made a documentary about my late wife, Adrienne Shelley, and my major goal was to tell people about who she was. You think you know about Adrienne? You don't. Here's who she was.
I want to say I was such a big fan of hers, both personally, both professionally and personally. And personally, she had a film on the when we had A Perfect Candidate making the festival doing the festival circuit. And so I got to know her, and just the best, and so my heart goes out to you and to all of us for the loss of her. But what a great spirit and great human she was.
Sure
I was grateful to know her, even just a little.
I'm glad you got to know her, and I appreciate your kind words about her. I didn't realize Elton John was so miserable back in those days. And when he was at the height of his fame in your film, he says, I just wanted someone to put their arm around me. And I was like, dude, you're just like everyone else, right? Like, and that's how a great film could just reach through the screen and grab the audience at home. Because here's this guy who had everything beyond his wildest imaginations, success that he couldn't even fathom. At the end of the day, he just wanted somebody to put his arm around him.
Well, isn't that the story?
Yeah.
Isn't that the story? You know, this is a movie about mortality. And Elton tells us that at the very beginning, and making it, I was very kind of conscious of that. Life is long and life is short, and you have the opportunity to make these decisions that are going to hopefully bring serendipity your way, but you choose the life you want. And that's why the It's Never Too Late is the perfect title and the perfect song for the end of the film, and what the film is fundamentally about, that how you're going to live your life is a choice that you make, and knowing what you need for happiness. It doesn't matter if the gods have gifted you Mozartian talent. If you've got nobody to share it with and you're Elton John, you're unfulfilled.
Yeah. Well, that's the most powerful, poignant message of the film is that, to me, you don't even need to be an Elton John fan to watch this film. You don't even have to know who Elton John was, because Elton John is a human, and you're going to watch a guy who's going through perhaps same stuff you're going through. So it's really a human interest story. It's a story about redemption. It's a story about getting kicked off the horse a million times, getting back up on that horse, and hopefully finding at the end of the road, what you really want in life. And there's so many moments in this film. There's so many reasons for people to watch this film, and I'm not going to do any spoilers, but for me, there's always a few things in a movie that just stand out so much. And the collaboration between, I don't understand the collab. I don't understand how Bernie can say, okay, Elton, here's some lyrics. And then Elton can look at the lyrics and go, okay, I'm going to create an iconic melody. Just like, boom, okay.
Yeah. And it's funny because neither of them really describe it as pop song writing. One of them is writing a poem, and that's Bernie.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them is making a movie, and that's Elton.
Yeah.
And that's how they do it. It's almost like a poem that becomes a script, and a movie that becomes a song. It's extraordinary to see. Yeah.
Yeah. And how Bernie describes how he sometimes wouldn't, hear the song until it was on the radio or something. Like, they collaborated in the most unique way. But when Elton was sitting at the piano explaining how he put, and taking us through how he put music to Tiny Dancer, I mean, that was just absolutely riveting to watch that process. It reminds me of the Get Back documentary, watching these four geniuses from Liverpool sitting there and like, okay, something in the way. Like, oh my God, are we really watching these guys compose this in front of our eyes? Like, and that's what it was like watching him work through Tiny Dancer. Just brilliance that you can't even fathom.
Yeah. Listen, watching this is another part of what's, it's related to what we were talking about before, but one of the privileges of the work that we do is we get to witness greatness, and we get to witness how it works. I mean, look, you're in the room. Trust me, in 30 years, people will be talking about the Billie Eilish documentary, The World's a Little Blurry, and in much the same way. You're in the room with 17-year-old Billie Eilish and her brother Phineas when they're writing When We All Fall Asleep, the whole album, and songs of this from the second album, and you're seeing the way they're turning their life into art. You see it in the great archive we've been able to we've been able to find and dig up, uncover with Elton John. And this is one, one of the subjects of my work is greatness, and one of the subjects is the fact that greatness is in the hands of mere mortals. I've always said the Billie film is about a girl who's half alien, half human. The talent is otherworldly. There's no explaining the talent. There's no understanding it. It comes from the heavens, and it's extraordinary to see, and there's no explanation for it. But the human part we understand in because we're all human too, and we've all been teenagers, and we've all suffered the first heartbreak, and we've all had to figure out how to get through those teenage years and to be ourselves. These are the things that kind of drive me in my storytelling.
I love the way you did the film with parallel tracks. One, just as the through line, has this Dodger Stadium concert, retirement concert towards the end of the film, and then also the other track of just going back through his life and telling his story and how it all comes together in the end. Was that always the structure you had in mind, or was that just something that evolved?
Yeah, well, as you know, this film is co-directed with David Furnish. David is Elton's husband, and also a brilliant storyteller, and a great human, and dear friend. And he had made a film about Elton some years before, but he's not a career documentary filmmaker. So when he had the idea to make a film about the final months of Elton's touring career, he reached out to me to see if I would want to collaborate together, and I was honored, and thought what a kind of great new way to do this. I had co-directed before, but never under these circumstances, and there was so much of the emotional intimacy that the film is able to achieve as a byproduct, I believe, of that unique collaboration. And when David described to me what he had in mind, these final months of Elton's tour, I mentioned to him what I had long thought would make a great film, which was the first 5 years of Elton's career. And that was the instinct, that there would be two periods of time. Now, what I didn't know, but what we discovered, and what made the film come together, we knew about the two Dodger Stadium performances, but what we didn't know was that there was a more significant rhyme between the two periods, which was the decision-making, the decision in the first instance to come out, and the decision in the second instance to retire, to enjoy the final chapter of his life with those he holds dearest, his family, his friends, his children. So, and that emotional, network of the narrative is where the film gets its powerful emotion from, because it's the resonance. Elton John coming out in 1976 to Rolling Stone magazine at the risk of his entire career, and we have the audio tapes of that interview and photographs from that interview. We didn't know the day I met David that we were going to get all that stuff, but having all of that and realizing that makes the rest of his life possible, that makes the happiness he ultimately achieves possible. Set aside the millions of people whose own happiness is made possible by the courage of Elton John to come out in 1976, the #1 pop star in the world, to come out and risk his career. I mean, that, in Rolling Stone, the macho bastion of rock and roll masculinity. Yeah, that was quite a moment. So there was an instinct, a narrative instinct that these two periods would rhyme and make a good film, but the filmmaking revealed just how rich it was.
Mm-hmm. And again, I'm not going to do any spoilers, but the ending, what a beautiful ending to this film. Truly beautiful. I mean, I was a weeping mess, I got to say.
Thank you. Yeah, people have a very, very, very strong emotional, we played the film all over the world and we've had the great good fortune to see what it's like in a theater with thousands of people, and you have audiences, if you are capable, if you are available to be moved by a film that explores mortality, that explores the power of family, that explores love, that explores the consequences of the decisions we make in this brief moment that we're here, I think you find this film very moving. And some good tunes, too. And a cameo from John Lennon.
I love the part about John Lennon and the Madison Square Garden show, because I'm a massive Beatles fan. Love John Lennon. When Adrian and I got married, we danced to Oh My Love. I was able to get Yoko Ono to give me that song for nothing for my film. I was so moved by his vulnerability, his fear. I mean, here was this Beatle, right? Maybe 3-4 years. 3-4 years after they broke up. And yet he's terrified to walk on that stage. And you captured this historic moment picture perfectly.
Yes. Well, thank you for saying so. And I think one of the reasons, we started this conversation with what was young RJ like. One of the reasons why we were able to capture this moment as fully as we did is because sitting up at the height and the last rows of the green seats at Madison Square Garden that night was 13-year-old RJ Cutler.
Wow.
I was in the room, so I knew what it was like.
That's awesome.
And this is something that I mentioned to David. I told him the story when we first met, and of course I told Elton the story, and there aren't a lot of people who were in the room with Elton that night who he still knows, but what an honor to be one of them. And I knew it was never, I knew how loud it had to be in the mix. I knew exactly, that story is told fully. I'm always saying these films are a combination of what we witness and what we experience while we're witnessing it. As a filmmaker, what I experience while I'm, in a way, I'm the subject of the film who isn't the subject of the film. Mm-hmm. But if you made the film, whatever film it was, with the same access, the same footage, the same crew, it would be a completely different film than if I made the film.
Absolutely.
Every single time. And the difference is the difference between you and me experiencing these things. And so I experienced it. There is a 13-year-old boy in that scene saying, yes, you got it right. Yes, that's what it felt like. Yes, the emotion is right. Yes, the volume is correct. The mix is good. All of those things. So, and I'll tell you, one of the, we talk about, again, about the roots of the work. One of the only way I was in that room was because I had literally forged a gift certificate at my local record store, a number of gift certificates, which allowed me to enter a contest for those tickets, because you couldn't get tickets to that. Mm-hmm. There's no resale market, and my parents weren't buying me tickets to Elton John. Believe me, they barely let me go when I won the tickets with forged gift certificates from this lottery. And when I met D.A. Pennebaker, one of the first things he said to me was, if you want to be a documentary filmmaker, you're going to have a bank robber's mentality. And I was like, what do you mean? He said, you're going to have to travel light and always be ready to make a run for it. Mm. And I was like, okay, I get it. I totally get it. I'm the guy who forged the gift certificates to get into Elton John. And it's still paying off, the bank robber mentality all these years later, because we could make that scene as fully as we did.
Listening to you share that story, in your film, Elton talks about him meeting his idol, John Lennon, how he rode his bicycle to the record store to buy Beatles records. Now here you are telling me that at 13, you, well, I'm going to say broke the law because it sounds more dramatic and interesting. But
it was a grand larceny. Yeah, crying out loud.
You broke the law to go see Elton John, and how many years later, you're making a film about him. You're working with him. Yeah. What did that mean to you? In the same way that we hear Elton talk about getting to work with his hero.
It meant everything to me. I to be able to go from admirer to collaborator to friend, it means that it's meant the world. And I don't believe I've ever made a film about a hero. And Elton was genuinely a hero of mine when during those formative teenage years. And I loved his work, and I listened to those albums during those 5 years, over and over and over again in a way that helped form my aesthetic. And going to see that concert helped form my aesthetic and my entire sense of what spectacle was and what theatricality was. I mean, you got to imagine Elton John came out on stage on the shoulders of two loincloth bodybuilders and wearing a giant headdress and 6-inch heels, and you'd never seen anything like it. I had never seen any. I was, the kid from the suburbs sitting up in the rafters. But then to meet him all these years later, and not just Elton John from then, to meet the man, the real man, who he is. It's and the friendship with him and with David, and getting to know the family and the close friends around him, Andrew Watt and Brandy Carlisle, the family that he forms of his nearest and dearest, the values that he stands for. I mean, we see it in the film. Yeah. The endless curiosity, the passion, the support for others, for young artists. I remember being with Billie Eilish on tour before her album came out, and her being told that Elton wanted to interview her for his podcast, and we filmed the interview from her point of view, and I could feel her, how she couldn't believe the moment that Elton John was reaching out to her, and I felt it for her, given who I was at that moment. This is so there you are. It was a real honor, and by the way, I'm not sure I would have agreed to co-direct with a subject's a husband had it not been Elton John. But I never hesitated, because it was Elton John,
right?
And here we are. And I found a whole new idea of what it means to direct in this partnership. It was beautiful. Working with David was a beautiful experience that, as I say, accessed a certain emotional ability in my filmmaking, and I'm incredibly grateful for it.
Yeah, it's just your whole story there is just such a beautiful element to this film. So let's talk about Martha, which is a Netflix film. And I'm going to go on a limb and say that you did not ever commit a crime to score tickets to the Martha Stewart show. Am I right?
That is correct. That is correct. Martha is more consistent with what my other experiences have been, with things I'm very curious about. But for instance, I knew Vogue magazine when I made the September issue, but I had never, I knew it as something my mother read. I knew it as I was not a Vogue. I was not a fashionista. I was not a Vogue fan. With Martha Stewart, I had maybe seen her show once or twice, but never from beginning to end. I didn't own Martha Stewart cookbooks. I knew her story. I knew her story to a degree, but learning her story was my experience in this film. And it's why I think you learn what you learn when you watch this film, which is something not just about Martha Stewart, but really something about American womanhood and
manhood.
And manhood. Exactly. And that's it. I mean, in the business world, in relationships, in narrative.
Yeah, no, I mean, I
ways.
love this film. She is such a brilliant person, genius even, but also incredibly complex.
Yes.
You did such a great job capturing her incredibly innate business skills, as well as her woefully lacking people skills. Okay, and she should be the person you really loathe. But by the end of the film, you don't. Or at least I didn't. I understood her. I appreciated her. I respected her. I also felt sorry for her. And I do believe that she got fucked over. And all of that comes through so powerfully in your film.
Well, thank you. And what's so interesting about this film to me in terms of audience response is that there's a range of responses that includes what you just said, but also includes all the same kinds of things, but she's an inspiration to me. I loved her more than I've ever loved any, I ever thought I could love her. I've been a lifelong fan, and I'm even more of a fan now. There's 99% of people fall into the full range that includes what, goes from what you just described to what I've added to it. And it's very interesting. It's rare that you make a film and what you hoped and imagined in a very complex story, the range of responses is the range of responses. It's like even with Elton, I'm going to say 80% of people have this deeply emotional response. And then about 20% of them are like, well, what about Lady Di? And what about this? And why don't you have this? And why don't, they want a biopic,
of course,
not a film about mortality. And so they don't connect to it emotionally for whatever reason. Not with Martha. With Martha, pretty much. And dude, they talk about the Netflix effect. This is my first feature documentary on Netflix. I mean, over 30 million people have watched this film. It is a for a documentary filmmaker where a couple of $1 million at the box office used to be a big deal.
Right.
This is 30 million. Multiply that by even a $12 ticket, and we know tickets are a lot more than that. Wow, in terms of the impact it's had.
Well, she's such an iconic figure, but she's also crossed over. I mean, if you would have said to me years ago, Martha Stewart, she's going to collaborate with Snoop Dogg, I'd be like, what fucking drugs are you smoking? Right? Like, who would have ever? But she did that.
So she's so
and it
smart.
Works. It works.
And she sees the future, and because she's focused on it, and she's always been a visionary. She saw where retail could go. She saw where synergy could go. She saw that content was king before the phrase was coined. She saw that you could be an influencer. She saw it all, and she knew how to monetize it. And she had the courage of her convictions. And every time she put a conviction forward, there was a guy there to tell her she was wrong. And she said, well, too bad for you. I'll take the gals and I'll go my way. And she went her way time and time and time again. But she came up against her own limitations, her own character limitations.
Or the limitations of what powerful men were willing to accept.
At the same time, they all converge.
Yeah.
They all converge. Powerful men like James Comey created an almost insurmountable obstacle, and the nature of who she was and her unwillingness to cop to having committed a crime in the service of a crime that she didn't commit. The injustice of it, the selective prosecution is really, is on some level the real crime. But It was almost a perfect storm. It would require a perfect storm to have brought her down. And what do you know? A perfect storm showed up.
Yeah, and because of her broad fan base, which, I'm sure there were a lot of hip hop fans who watched your film who were only there because of her collaboration with Snoop.
Type a Martha Stewart documentary into TikTok, you won't believe it.
Yeah.
I mean,
I believe
millions and millions of hits on these videos that have been posted, and thousands of videos that have been posted from people who got to know her through this film in a way that they didn't know her before.
Well, we know Martha Stewart as a control freak. But my last couple of questions really pertain to the access you had to her, how much was she freely available to you, as well as how much did she do her Martha thing in trying to tell you how to make this film?
Well, I mean, I had tremendous access to her. Look, I knew, if you know Martha, it doesn't take great insight to know, and if you don't have the insight, she'll tell you that she is not somebody who likes to self-reflect. She told me that she had been to therapy once, and 10 minutes into the session, she got up and stormed out of the room. And on her way out the door, she said, "Don't send me a bill." That's Martha's experience with therapy. Can you imagine? Martha Stewart, of all people, has had one abbreviated therapy session in her entire life. Yes, that's who she is. She wants to look forward. She does not want to look back. She does not want to analyze. She does not want to connect those dots. It's who she is. But at the same time, I met her because she crashed a dinner that I was at to come and talk to me about the possibility of making a movie. So I knew she wanted to tell her story, which, by the way, is the most human thing there is, to want your story told. And she was ready. It wasn't just that she wanted to tell it, it was that she was ready to tell it, even though I also knew it was going to be challenging for her. So instead of just interviewing her, I did a number of Zooms with her over the course of a year, 3 or 4 different Zooms where we talked through her life, and we recorded it, and some of it's in the film, but mostly we were just kind of getting to know each other and getting to know I was getting to know the things that she did want to talk about and the things that she didn't want to talk about, and then I went to her home in Maine, and for 5 days we filmed her 8 hours a day. That's a lot of filming. We would take lovely lunches. Always the best food was served. This was Martha Stewart, of course.
Shocking.
Yes, exactly. And it was a beautiful summer week in Maine, in her beautiful home in Maine. And but we got into it, and some things she didn't want to talk about, and she's very clear about that. But people reveal themselves not just when they talk. Talking is one of the things we do as humans. Another thing we do is not talk.
Right. Body language.
There's a lot to be revealed in not talking. And sometimes we say, we talk and say, "I don't want to talk." And that reveals a lot about who we are. And sometimes we talk and we don't tell the truth. And that reveals a lot about who we are. And so there's a lot of ways to understand Martha Stewart and to understand her story. And of course, there is the literary convention of the unreliable narrator. Now, the unreliable narrator isn't always unreliable. Sometimes the unreliable narrator is revealing herself in incredibly insightful ways. But sometimes the unreliable narrator is revealing herself through the mistruths she states. And this is where this movie lives.
And was she a cook in the kitchen, or she allowed you to make the meal?
The answer is I made the movie. Look, the night we met at the dinner that I referred to, as I always do when I'm heading towards making a film with somebody, whether it's Anna Wintour or Billie Eilish or Martha Stewart, is I said, if we're going to do this, I have to have Final Cut. And she agreed. And that was that. But that doesn't mean that I don't share it.
Of course.
That doesn't mean that I don't talk to people about it. And when the film is almost done, I share the cut I shared the cut with Martha, and she looked at it, and she had some feedback. And as I always do, it wasn't all done. It was about 20 minutes longer than it is now. We had about 3 months left in the process. And I told her that where her feedback and my intentions overlapped, so that she could be assured that some of the things that she thought should happen were going to happen. But most of the things that she wanted to happen weren't going to happen. And I let her know that as well. And then she saw another cut, and the conversation was the same. And then we finished. And she was, her list of kind of what she wished was different is her entitlement,
right?
If she were making the film would be a different film than if I were making. And God bless her, I'm all for it. I remember somebody saying to me, "Are you going to be concerned if Martha Stewart says she didn't? There were things that she would want different." Who wouldn't want different? If I were making a film about you would want a different. If when people write about me, I'm like, "Where's this part? Where's the part about how super duper I am all the time?
Where's the part when I volunteered at the soup kitchen? How come that didn't make it in?"
Exactly. So,
well, you're making a film. You're not setting out to make somebody happy, and that's where that's where the landscape with documentaries gets really tricky. But it is a great film.
It's a movie.
Yeah, it's a movie, and it's honest.
And so and so we are our friendship is as strong as ever. I have no concerns about the fact that she was public with her dissatisfaction. If anything, it probably drew more eyeballs to watching it, and I'm grateful for that. She recognizes that, all the times I said to her, "Don't worry, people are going to love you even more. Your foibles are your imperfections and are part of your great charm and their attraction to you. The story is truthful and people will respond to that. And you will be an inspiration." And she sees that because she goes out and people tell her that. And the critical response has been true. It's gone quite well. So, and she's welcome to make her own film or write a book or whatever. And God bless.
Yeah. Well, it is a great film. People should watch it. It's on Netflix. RJ, we could talk for hours. Do come back and chat with me again. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Me too. Thank you so much. It's been lovely. Thanks.
All righty. Take care. This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.